Kanban doesn't work for us because we don't have items of the same size. If I had $1 for every time I heard this statement, I could afford to spend my time laying on the beach on some tropical island all day long, all year round. Let's start from the basics. The Kanban method turned a new page in the agile world and moved the focus from spending time and effort on estimating our work to doing the actual work itself. You don't have to count hours or story points to come up with reliable delivery commitments anymore. But Sonya, if we don't estimate our work, how do we know when we will be done? Great question. First, you optimize your delivery process for predictability, and then you use your past performance data to get that answer. And the answer will simply look something like this. We will be done in less than 10 days, and we are 85% certain that we'll hit that target. And this commitment will be valid for any type of work. Now, I can bet I know what you're thinking. Sonya, this will only make sense if we split our items into even pieces. No, it won't. And here is why. Did I say the effort time needed to finish any type of work must be exactly 10 days? No, I didn't. Did I say that the delivery time of any type of work will be exactly 10 days? No, I didn't. Always remember, effort time and delivery time are not the same things. What I said is that we'll deliver the work in less than 10 days, and most probably we will be done earlier, but it won't take us longer than 10 days. There is an 85% probability that we can achieve our goal. It all boils back down to the predictability of our delivery system. It all depends on what management practices and process policies we have in place to make this happen. So, how can we keep our delivery times within the threshold of 10 days? If we don't split our items into even pieces, how are we going to keep that commitment? Let's assume that a new request just arrived and the nature of the work is complex. Our gut says that the effort time on its own will most probably exceed 10 days. In order to preserve the consistency of our delivery times, what we do in cases like this is adjust our management practices to make sure we still deliver on time. And here is what our 5-step guideline for managing items of different sizes looks like. The 5 steps are assessing the complexity of the work, reevaluating the business opportunity, splitting the item into pieces of customer value, setting explicit process policies, and finally, managing the work effectively to make sure we preserve the predictability of our delivery times. The first step to handling items of complex nature is to identify them. Now, we decide what are the most important things we should focus on next during our weekly replenishment meetings. And usually they are split into 2 parts, analysis and forecasting. The main goal of the analysis part is to gain an understanding of the problem we're trying to solve. During the analysis, we unambiguously define the what and why. The most important part of this specific stage is the conversation regarding what needs to be done, why we're doing it, and for whom we're doing it. The main goal of the forecasting part is to evaluate whether there is a risk of breaking our 10-day commitment. And we usually spend just a couple of minutes performing this assessment. During the forecasting process, the only question we're interested in is, would the effort time needed to complete this work item exceed 10 days? And if the answer is no, we no longer have to talk about it because we know that our process policies guarantee we'll deliver the work within 10 days. So we move on to the next item. If the answer is yes though, then we continue the conversation. The second step of the process is reevaluating whether that big task is really a priority at the moment. Ask the following questions. Is that initiative going to realize a market opportunity? If we start it right now, is it going to realize a return on investment for our business? And if you're positive that's the case, you will start working on this item right away, of course. If that's the highest priority, you will initiate the work as soon as possible, naturally. If you're in doubt though, I would highly advise that you don't start that piece of work right now. Otherwise, you will be reserving capacity for work that's not yet due and run out of capacity for work that is due. In fact, when I work with managers in our program, I often see big pieces of work with a low priority stuck in the workflow. These items have the potential to ruin your predictability and cause major inefficiency in terms of flow. As a rule of thumb, regardless of its complexity, if the work is not important, do not initiate it. The third step for handling complex work items effectively is to question whether we have come up with the most feasible solution from a customer's perspective. Is it possible to split that story into multiple chunks that still bring value to our customers? And naturally, these chunks will be of different sizes. So when it comes to splitting stories, you should always approach it by putting yourself in your customer's shoes. You don't want to cut your stories artificially just to fit into a time box or to make your metrics look nicer. This is wrong. Ask yourself, is there an alternative approach that will solve our customer's problem? Is there anything else we can do, something smaller, something easier, that will still help them achieve their goals? And when you're splitting your stories, think about what's the easiest and fastest way to provide a deliverable to your clients. The goal here is to deliver results and collect their feedback sooner so you can adjust your course accordingly. A word of caution here. Splitting your stories is a continuous process. It's a perfectly valid scenario that your team may be working through a story in the development workflow and find that the story turns out to be way more complicated than you initially assumed. In this case, you go through this step again. So, if this big item is the highest priority at the moment, in terms of effort it will take more than 10 days to be developed and it can be split into smaller pieces that still solve your customer's problem, you have to make sure that the team is entirely focused on finishing that work. In order to achieve that and reduce context switching as much as possible, you should introduce an explicit process policy to temporarily stop accepting new work until you finish that item. This approach will enable you to handle complex work effectively from multiple perspectives. First, you promote pair programming and remove knowledge silos. Your team members will pair together to work on the big item. Essentially, what you do is allocate more capacity to that specific piece of work. Second, you reduce distractions and multitasking. The main goal of the team becomes to deliver this high priority work item. And last, but certainly not least, you eliminate all the opportunities of any other items to steal time from this big chunk of work. It has the highest priority now, and you want to set up an environment of effective collaboration to make the work move through the process smoothly. Once the big item is released, then you can move back to your initial capacity allocation. Once the work has been started, you need to manage it effectively to make sure you keep your commitment. So, the team needs to be focused on working on that item, and if there are any impediments, bottlenecks, blockers or dependencies that arise, you resolve them right away. And that's not only valid for complex work items, that rule applies in general. You should always strive to reduce the waiting time that your work spends in the system. Furthermore, keep track of the obstacles that cause that waiting time and address them during your retrospectives. Take action accordingly and evaluate how the changes you implement affect your performance and your flow metrics, as well as how your team feels about the new way of working. Meet all objections proactively. That's why it's important to always make one small step at a time. That's how you achieve evolutionary improvement that is here to stay. And if you've done the work and there are items that still take longer than you anticipated, then that's perfectly fine. That's just the nature of your work. If you have work of this nature now, it's highly likely that you will have work of this nature in the future as well. That data will gradually build up on your historical performance. Your delivery time trends and your thresholds will adjust accordingly. You do want to account for that data to be able to manage realistic expectations. Ultimately, the goal is to build a delivery system that enables you to make reliable delivery commitments in just a couple of minutes. And remember, it's not about the size of your work items. It's all about how effectively you manage your workflow. The only prerequisite to hitting your targets consistently is to optimize your systems for predictability.